Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I am Kevin Hernandez with the Roseville Area Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to the 4th Congressional District Candidate Meet and Greet. We're very honored this afternoon to be joined by Congressman Tom McClintock and Businesswoman Brynne Kennedy. This is a moderated discussion as well as sponsored by the Lincoln Area Chamber of Commerce, the Loomis Basin Chamber of Commerce, the Rocklin Area Chamber of Commerce, and the Roseville Area Chamber of Commerce. We are honored once again to be joined by Congressman McClintock, who will have an opening statement as well as a closing statement, and then 4 questions with the time frame of 3 minutes, each question asked by a member of each chamber. So again, this discussion is moderated by Tom Indrieri of Lincoln, Jenny Knisely of Loomis Chamber, Robin Trimble of Rocklin Chamber, and Wendy Gerig of Roseville Chamber. So Congressman, we're going to have you start with your opening statement.
Well, great, Kevin, thank you very much, and thank you for doing this. As you know, it was less than a year ago when we were enjoying the greatest economic expansion in our lifetimes. We had the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. In Trump's first 3 years, average wages grew 5 times faster than in Obama's 8 years combined. And that wasn't by accident. It was because a Republican administration and a Republican Congress enacted the largest combined tax and regulatory relief in our nation's history. My fight for these reforms is reflected in the fact that Citizens Against Government Waste, the National Taxpayers Union, and the National Federation of Independent Business have consistently rated me one of the best votes in Congress over the years that I've served there. In fact, in many years, they've rated me as the best vote in the entire House of Representatives. Now, back in March, I warned that the lockdowns were insane and would do far more harm than good. Now the World Health Organization agrees. The lockdowns didn't save lives. We can see that by looking at Sweden, where the schools stayed open, the shops stayed open, and the government trusted citizens to make their own decisions according to their own circumstances. For the last 3 months, COVID deaths have averaged less than 1 per day in that country. Their overall mortality rate is significantly lower than the United States, and they've sustained far less economic damage. The lockdowns cost lives from additional suicides, drug and alcohol deaths, deferred health screenings and health treatments, and poverty-related deaths. Ending the lockdowns and restoring the economy is going to be job one for the new Congress, and I'm looking forward to getting our country back to the prosperity that freedom produces. But there are far more important issues afoot than even that. I believe this election is the most important since 1864 for this reason. If the Democrats capture the White House, the Senate, and the House, their leaders have made crystal clear their intent to pack the Supreme Court with new seats, to pack the Senate with new states, to bypass the Electoral College, which would cut the rural states out of any significant say in the selection of future presidents, rig the election laws as they have in California, and drop enforcement of our immigration laws. This will fundamentally change the institutions that give stability and continuity to our government and will shift the balance of power permanently in our country to the radical left. We can expect various versions of the Green New Deal, higher taxes, open borders to follow. And there'll be little recourse that future voters will have. So this election matters.
Thank you so much for that, Congressman. So we're now going to get to our first question. It will be asked by Tom Indrieri, Executive Director of Lincoln Area Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, Tom.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for joining us. My question, with so many businesses and households still reeling from this pandemic, what is your stance on the proposed multi-trillion-dollar stimulus package?
Well, I supported the CARES Act, which was the, and its successor, which were the major legislation that produced the Paycheck Protection Plan, the so-called stimulus checks, basically supported the economy. But I said at the time, that could only do so for a few weeks. The economy supports the government. The government does not support the economy. I warned at the time that there was no, this was in March, There was no substitute for reopening the economy and reopening it now. And we can see that in the states that stayed open. There were a number of Republican states that did so. Utah, for example, stayed open. They sit right next to Colorado. Same demographics, same geography, same climate, same balance between rural and urban areas. Utah stayed open. They had about 1/3 the COVID mortality as Colorado, and about half of the economic damage. Their unemployment rate is running well under Colorado's. That's the damage that was done. So I will support additional funding provided that it is linked to an end to the lockdowns, that liability protection is provided for small, in fact, for all businesses, because we can see what's coming next with the trial lawyers. That any governmental support that's intended for local governments goes directly to those local governments, and the federal funds should not be used to bail out badly managed states. I also want to be sure that the funding in the future is targeted to those who actually were harmed by the lockdowns. As you know, in the CARES package, we sent out money willy-nilly, whether people were harmed by the lockdown or not. To those who were harmed, it was a drop in the bucket. And to those who were not harmed, it was simply a gift. And we have to be much more targeted in the future. One final thought, and that involves the Families First Act, because I know I've been attacked for opposing that. As you know, the Families First Act required small businesses that had now had their revenues shut down by these lockdown orders to front 90 days of paid leave for their employees. The result was, in the days leading up to the bill taking effect, 4.5 million Americans lost their jobs as small businesses cut their payrolls to protect themselves from incurring this liability when the bill took effect. I warned at the time that a lot of this legislation was being considered in panic, and I think we'll be looking back on the lockdown and the reactions to it as perhaps the most self-destructive panic in the history of human civilization.
Thank you so much for your response, Congressman. We are now going to hear from Jenny Knisely, Executive Director of the Loomis Basin Chamber of Commerce.
Hello.
Hi, Jenny.
Small business is a concern for, healthcare is a concern for small business. What policy solutions do you support to address the rising cost of healthcare? And where do you stand on defending protections for people with pre-existing conditions and other critical consumer protection established by the ACA?
Well, I supported the American Health Care Act that passed the House and that failed in the Senate by just one vote. That was John McCain's infamous vote. That assured, basically, it placed patients back in the role of consumers, where they would own their own policies. So much of the run-up in healthcare costs is because of excess government regulation. You're not allowed to buy across state lines, for example. If you can find a better policy at a lower price in another state, why shouldn't you be able to buy that? You can do that for your auto insurance. Why can't you do that for your health insurance? Why shouldn't we be expanding health savings accounts so people can pay for their health costs with pre-tax dollars? These were the reforms that were part of the American Health Care Act. The idea was to open up the system, provide the largest range of choices that a competitive free market system can produce, allow individuals to choose the plan that best meets their own needs, and have a supportive tax structure to assure that every family had within their reach at least a basic health plan. Those with pre-existing conditions were protected with the same kind of assigned risk pool as we currently use for those who can't be insured for auto insurance through the general markets. Those systems worked, they worked well, they assured the widest range of choices at the lowest prices. Will and Ariel Durant once asked the question, what makes Ford a good car? Chevrolet, competition. We've taken competition largely out of the healthcare marketplace, and what that has produced is skyrocketing costs. Milton Friedman once pointed out, you look at any area where technology is dominant, the price for these products has dropped dramatically in any technology dependent industry, except for one, healthcare. And why is that? Because the government stepped in, imposed all sorts of restrictions and regulations that reduced competition, reduced consumer choices, and placed most Americans in the position that unless they have a plan through their employer, or they don't own their plan, the employer does. That's what I'm trying to say. I'll tell you something, if my employer chose my cereal for me, my guess is I wouldn't like it very much.
Thank you, Congressman. We're now going to hear from Robin Trimble, CEO of Rocklin Area Chamber of Commerce.
Hi,
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Congressman McClintock. Good to have you here today. So my question is, what should the federal government do to control the spread of COVID-19?
Well, I think Sweden got it right and we got it wrong. If you look at the situation in Sweden today, it breaks my heart we didn't do the same thing. I advocated following Sweden's model at the time. It took 33 days from the first death to the peak day of deaths in Sweden, and then a steady decline after that. That's a pattern you see in any of the countries, or for that matter, states that stayed open. It is your typical Ferris viral curve. In Sweden, in the Netherlands, this crisis has been over for many, many months. Sweden kept their shops open, kept their schools open. There were no mask mandates in Sweden, or for that matter, the Netherlands. In fact, the Netherlands last month issued a health advisory telling their citizens not to wear masks. And it's all but over there. You as I said, in Sweden, you've got averaging less than one death a day in the entire country. And yet look at what we're doing to this country. It was about 145 days from the first death to the peak deaths in California. If you look at the mortality rate from COVID in Sweden, it's now, you remember how they were attacked because they were running such a much higher mortality rate in the United States. Their mortality rate is now well under that of the United States. And as I said, we're still recording a lot of deaths, particularly in the lockdown states. Sweden, Netherlands, those nations that followed sound medical science did not. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the virus particularly struck the elderly. If you're under 50 and otherwise healthy, you have a greater chance of dying from seasonal flu than you have from COVID. The average age of death by COVID in the United States is 78 years old. You know what the average life expectancy in the United States is? 78 years old. And when you consider the amount of damage that these lockdowns and repressive measures have taken on our economy, and then consider all of the additional deaths by suicide, drug and alcohol related deaths, deferred health treatments and health screenings, general poverty related deaths, Alzheimer's. We've seen a huge spike in Alzheimer's deaths during these lockdowns because these poor people have been left lying in bed staring at the ceiling 24/7. As I said, this is going to be recorded as the greatest self-destructive panic in history. We should have done what Sweden did. I said so at the time. I think it's very clear in retrospect that was the correct way to go. And states like California in particular have blown it, and they continue to refuse to recognize the errors that were made throughout this crisis.
And lastly, we're going to hear from Wendy Gerig, CEO of Roseville Area Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Congressman. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
So my question is around earmarks. And I would ask you, aren't earmarks an effective tool Congress could use to build bipartisan coalitions while providing funding for important municipal projects in our areas?
Well, what we found is that earmarks were a breeding ground for corruption. There were a number of scandals, including here, involving earmarks before the Congress rightly banned them. I think one of the big misunderstandings about earmarks is misunderstanding about how our system of government and our checks and balances work. The American founders believed that if you combine all of the powers of government into one hand, that's the essence of tyranny. That's why they divided the powers of government. So all of the executive authority is placed in the president. The legislative authority is placed in the legislative branch, in the Congress. Now, what that means is, well, mother's rule. You all know mother's rule. One slice of pie, two hungry brothers. How does mother slice the pie so that every time both brothers go away satisfied? One brother slices, the other chooses. The ambitions of one brother check the ambitions of the other. The powers given to one brother cannot be abused because of the powers given to another. That's why one brother in our system makes law but cannot enforce it. The other brother enforces law but cannot make it. One brother declares war but cannot fight it. The other brother wages war but cannot declare it. And when it comes to appropriations, and this dates back to Magna Carta and the first parliaments, one brother appropriates funds but cannot spend them. The other brother spends funds but cannot appropriate. When the appropriations and the spending are combined in the hands of one body, in this case the Congress, you have now short-circuited that system of checks and balances that is so critical to our form of government. I've often said good projects do not require earmarks. Only unmeritorious projects require earmarks. Congress appropriates funds for specific purposes, but the moment that it is spending those funds for those same purposes, you've broken down the checks and balances that are a critical protection for taxpayers and a critical protection against corruption.
Thank you for that, Congressman McClintock. And now we will hear your closing statement.
Well, I just want to thank you for putting this together today. I don't really have a closing statement other than to point out how important this election is going to be. Abraham Lincoln reminded us many years ago that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And he went on to say, and this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. He said, I do not expect the government to dissolve. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect that it will cease to be divided. It must become all one thing or all the other. Lincoln understood that there are times when there were antithetical principles vying for the future of our country. Freedom and slavery were such principles. They're polar opposites. They're matter and antimatter. You can try to hold them together in an unstable coalition, but ultimately one is going to devour the other. They simply can't coexist. And I do believe that that wheel has come full circle, and we are now dealing with two antithetical principles for the future of our country: freedom and socialism. In fact, if you look at it carefully, socialism and slavery sprang from exactly the same poisonous principle that Lincoln described as the same spirit that says, you work and toil and make bread, and I will eat it. You think about all of the free stuff that socialists offer us. Think about that free stuff. If you're getting free stuff, that means you are expropriating the fruit of somebody else's labor. That makes you a master and them a slave. When the socialists tell us, oh, well, socialism is sharing, taking care of each other, and capitalism, freedom is just dog eat dog, selfishness, taking care of yourself. They've got it exactly backwards. There is no possible way to compete, to succeed in a free society, in a capitalist marketplace, except by figuring out what somebody else needs and figuring out a way of providing that for them better than they can provide it for themselves. And you succeed to the exact extent that you're successful in doing so. Socialism is exactly the opposite. Socialism is taking what one person has earned by helping others for yourself and your friends. When you look at the Green New Deal, when you look at all of the universal health care programs that the Democrat majority has vowed to enact, well, you begin to realize the enormous amount of damage it can do. And when you consider the structural changes that they have already said they are going to enact if they can take a majority of the House, the Senate, and the White House, you begin to realize that when they call for fundamental transformation of our country, it will be a country very, very different than the vision of the American founders, very, very different from the constitutional design that has made America not only the envy of the world, but the most prosperous, safe, and envied nation in the history of human civilization. And that's what's at stake with this election.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Congressman Tom McClintock. We have a screen up right now with Congressman Tom McClintock's information should you want to contact his office. We're now joined by Businesswoman Brynne Kennedy. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, Brynne. We very much appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Absolutely. So we are now going to start with your opening statement. You'll have 3 minutes.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you to all of the chambers for hosting this forum. I'm Brynne Kennedy. I'm a candidate for Congress, but ironically, I spent most of my life pretty far from politics. I spent 15 years working in the private sector, and most of it out of business. I started at my kitchen table and grew to operate all over the world. And what that business does is it helps people work from everywhere, work remotely, work flexibly, which we are literally all doing right now in the midst of COVID. And as the business got bigger, I got invited to go to Washington and provide some feedback to members of Congress on the economy. Things like how we create jobs outside of urban hubs, how we ensure our nation is at the forefront of innovation, and how we grapple with some tough questions around cybersecurity and personal data and things like that. And quite frankly, I was horrified in those meetings. I mean, members of Congress in both parties, Democrats and Republicans, just seem so out of touch with the reality of running a business and where our economy is going and what a working family goes through today. And I thought, gosh, if I ever did my job like this, ignorant of substance and more interested in fighting than problem solving, I would have been fired pretty quickly, and with good reason. And I just didn't think we could accept this in Washington when we don't in other parts of the world. Because for me, it's very personal. I have a family that was very patriotic and very committed to service, served in the military. My dad got a degree through ROTC, and both of my parents had cancer, one with healthcare, one without healthcare. So I saw that politics really has an impact on real life and real people. And I thought, gosh, no one is more out of touch than our incumbent representative, Tom McClintock, who has been in politics for 40 years, taken in $4 million from taxpayers, never passed a single piece of consequential legislation in Congress, and is today rated the 5th most partisan member of Congress. That's pretty tough to do with the current Congress, being 430th out of 435 and actually getting anything done for us. And so I jumped in because the challenges that we face today are large and they are not unique to one party or the other. They are American challenges. We have COVID-19 ravaging families and businesses and putting people out of work. We have wildfire risks all throughout our district, and many of us looking outside our window at smoke. We have people scared about losing health care, protections for pre-existing conditions, or going through an illness like my mother did without good health care coverage. And we have chaos in our country and our community, and a Congress that can't get anything done. Washington isn't working for us, and when a sports team or a business, as you guys all know, is not working, the first thing you do is you change the people in it. And that is what I offer. New ideas to solve problems and attract jobs to our community, new energy to roll up my sleeves and get stuff done. But most importantly, the opportunity to turn a page to a new era where we just say, let's forget political party platforms and the games on TV and Twitter, and let's put people in progress first.
Your first question is coming from Tom Indrieri, Executive Director of the Lincoln Area Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, Brynne. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again. Sorry it's not in person.
Yes. With many small businesses and households still reeling from this pandemic, what is your stance on the proposed multi-trillion-dollar stimulus package?
You know, people are hurting, as you mentioned, Tom. You know, we have lots of people out of work in our district. In fact, in our district, the unemployment rate is multiple points higher than it is nationally. We have 1 in 5 small businesses that are failing today, 100,000 businesses across our country that have been shut down during this pandemic. And we have parents balancing working from home and homeschooling, all the while with infrastructure that is woefully out of date, you know, broadband deserts and roads with potholes in them. And, you know, I think we have to have some support to help us get through this pandemic and get things back to normal. What I support is I support a package that focuses on 3 things: creating jobs, putting people back to work, creating jobs for those who have been affected. Secondly, supporting our small businesses, extending the PPP program, creating tax and regulatory breaks and holidays to help our small businesses who have been disproportionately impacted come out of this pandemic stronger, and supporting our local and municipal governments with direct aid so that they can preserve vital public services, our police, our firefighters, you know, keep our parks safe and clean, and all the things that we all rely on that are already stretched during this pandemic. But that must be direct aid, and it must be done with a close partnership with our local and municipal governments.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Businesswoman Brynne Kennedy. Your second question now comes from Jenny Knisely, Executive Director of the Loomis Basin Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, Brynne. Healthcare is critical for our small businesses, and it's a concern for them. What policy solutions do you support to address the rising cost of healthcare? And where do you stand on defending protections for people with pre-existing conditions and other critical consumer protections established by the ACA?
Thank you for the question, Jenny. This is a very, very important issue, and also one that's very personal to me. As I mentioned in my opening, both of my parents had cancer, and my mother owns a Main Street store. And like so many small business owners, could never afford health care for her employees. So, you know, I felt what that was like as a family to have to navigate the complex and expensive healthcare system we have today. I've also run a business. I'm the only candidate in this race that has actually run a business, actually the only one who's had a job outside of politics. And so I know what a drag rising healthcare costs are on your bottom line as a business owner. So what I support is building upon the Affordable Care Act. It is not perfect, but it has provided healthcare coverage and protections for pre-existing conditions to 75,000 people in our community. I support adding a Medicare buy-in option to the exchanges. This is an option. Anyone can buy into it. A small business can elect to buy into that instead of provide coverage from the private sector. Crucially, that will be at a much lower rate than you can buy into in the private sector, and it will unlock coverage to many people. It also can be done without a penny of tax increases. And I'm very fiscally conservative, and in these times, we cannot support anything that will propose tax increases for anyone. We should be doing the opposite. So this is a way that we can unlock healthcare coverage, we can strengthen protections for pre-existing conditions, and with the effects of markets, so that will put pressure on the private market to reduce their costs over time as well. Now, McClintock has voted 60 times, 60, to gut healthcare and to remove protections for pre-existing conditions. I hear this from people all the time across our community, how scared they are about their coverage or about the rising costs of healthcare, especially in the middle of a pandemic. I will stand up for our healthcare, work for solutions, while he wants to take it away.
Your next question is coming from Robin Trimble, CEO of Rocklin Area Chamber of Commerce.
Hello.
Hi, Robin.
What should the federal government do to control the spread of COVID-19?
Well, you know, I don't think that this is actually that complicated. I think it's politics that's gotten in the way of containing COVID-19, not the fact that it's super complicated. I mean, we know how to control the spread. It's basic public health guidelines. It's wearing masks, it's social distancing, it's changing the way that businesses operate, like with outdoor dining, like you guys have been a part of in downtown Roseville and downtown Lincoln. If we do all of these things, we can contain the spread, we can get our businesses back opened, we can get our schools back opened, and we can get to some semblance of normalcy until we have a vaccine or we have a therapeutic treatment. The reason we haven't been able to do that is because we have divisive partisans, like my opponent, that are more interested in playing to a political party base or getting some retweets or talking to a cable TV host than they are in actually getting our businesses back open or getting our kids back to school. So what I support is standing behind public health guidelines, being a leader who emulates them, and working with our local community, our local governments, our local businesses to make sure that they have access to capital and they have the support that they need to make the changes that will allow reopenings fully, safely.
Thank you for that. And then your final question comes from Wendy Gerig, CEO of the Roseville Area Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, Brynne.
Hey, Wendy, good to see you.
Nice seeing you. So my question for you is regarding your philosophy on earmarks. So aren't earmarks an effective tool Congress could use to build bipartisan coalitions while providing funding for important municipal projects?
So, you know, I think as I've talked with quite a few of you about in the past, one of the big differences between me and the Congressman McClintock, in addition to me being the only one who's actually had a job outside of politics or signed a paycheck or managed anyone ever, is that I want to bring your money back to our community for infrastructure projects, for local governments to invest in areas where they see fit, bring grant money back. It's something I've consistently heard across our community, just how frustrated people are with the lack of money coming back for important projects like upgrading 80 and investing in rural broadband and other infrastructure projects. I actually live in our district. Tom does not. For those of you who don't know that, he's never lived in our community. He lives 50 miles away, votes for whoever is running in Ami Bera's district. But so I've actually sat in traffic on 80. I've actually driven across 50 and up and down 49 and seen the broadband deserts and talked to families whose kids had to sit in parking lots to connect to broadband to get schoolwork downloaded during this pandemic. I've actually sat with our local elected officials. In fact, there are 80 nonpartisan elected officials of all ideologies who are supporting my campaign. And so I know how important it is, Wendy, to be a federal representative that gets on a plane every week, goes to Washington, rolls up your sleeves, and elbows your way through 434 other people to get money back to our district. Our incumbent has voted against grants for broadband. He's voted against funding for our infrastructure projects. And I will not do that. I will work within the system to bring money back for critical projects so that we can grow our local economy. We can make it easier for businesses to operate. We can attract remote and virtual workers and commuters because if they live in our community, it creates 4 jobs in our local service economy and our small businesses. So with good infrastructure and investment in that, we can really, really accelerate our economy and help our community and create a close partnership between the federal representative and the local government.
Thank you so much for that, Businesswoman Brynne Kennedy. We now want to give you the opportunity to make any closing statements that you might have for those watching this afternoon.
You know, these are very upsetting and challenging times for all of us. We have a divided community. We have chaos across our country. We have COVID-19 changing the way we do business, the way our children learn, and creating all kinds of health and economic challenges for families all across our area. Tom McClintock has had 40 years in politics to prove that he can get things done. But he hasn't gotten anything done. He just talks. What I'm about is I'm about action. I'm about listening to people, picking up the phone to someone, regardless of what it says in front of their name, to get something done. Picking up the phone to a Republican or a Democrat. When was the last time Tom McClintock picked up the phone to someone with another letter in front of their name, or anyone for that matter? What I will do as your representative is I will be present. I will work across the aisle to solve these big problems. I will bring the empathy and the experience of having grown up in a working class family and built a business from my kitchen table to success operating around the world. And I will bring your tax dollars back to our community so that we can upgrade our infrastructure and be well prepared for a vibrant future after this pandemic. There are many things we can do together as we come out of this pandemic. We can reduce taxes and regulation for our businesses, reform things like CEQA and environmental regulation to invest in housing and infrastructure. We can attract virtual workers and commuters that will then spend money in our community and support our small businesses. And we can use tax incentives and R&D credits and capital gains holidays and opportunity zones to attract innovators and capital to South Placer County, create an innovation hub along 80 with software companies and biotechnology companies partnering with our great medical institutions and creating solutions for things like forest management, modernizing it, upgrading our energy grid, affordable housing, all things that we need. I am so excited to work with all of you to lead that future for our area. You know, we can come out of this pandemic and this deeply divided times stronger, but we can only do it if we say we reject partisanship. We stand up against it with the same passion that we fight for any economic or social issue. And we can turn a page to an era where we put people and progress ahead of political party games. I hope to have your support in November. And feel free to reach out to me anytime at brynne@brynneforcongress.com.
Brynne Kennedy, on behalf of the four chambers, we want to say thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We do have a screen up right now with all of your information on it, should anyone want to contact your office. We want to say thank you so much on behalf of all four chambers for joining us this afternoon. And I want to remind everybody to vote between now and November 3rd.